What happens when a prince who spent his life dodging controversy sits down on a show where controversy is the house specialty? Tonight, we uncover how a polite interview with Graham Norton turned into an all-out televised disaster as Prince Harry's patience shattered under the studio lights. It started as a charming chat. It ended in chaos. And before you judge, hear every biting word that pushed Prince Harry over the edge. This isn't just another royal interview. It's a royal reckoning. The studio was buzzing with excitement that night. The famous red sofa glowed under the lights, that iconic piece of television furniture that had hosted everyone from Hollywood legends to world leaders. The audience murmured in anticipation, their voices a low hum of expectation. And Graham Norton was in his element. Sipping water. Checking his cards. That trademark mischievous grin plastered across his face. Everything was set for another entertaining evening. When Prince Harry walked onto the set, the cheers were deafening. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, crisp white shirt, and no tie, his usual blend of casual and regal, Harry smiled and waved, giving that familiar boyish grin that had charmed the world for years. He shook hands with Graham, then slid into his seat at the far end of the sofa. The other guests smiled and greeted him warmly. For now, everything felt right. For now, everything felt normal. "Your Royal Highness," Graham said warmly, adjusting his cards as the applause faded. "It's not often we get real royalty on this sofa. How are you? How's life treating you these days?" Harry chuckled politely, settling into the cushions. "I'm good, Graham. Thank you. Busy, you know. Lots of work with mental health, veterans, and trying to just live a little more privately these days." The audience clapped again, their approval washing over the set. Graham nodded thoughtfully, his eyes glinting with something that might have been curiosity. "Ah, yes, privacy," he mused. "We'll get to that later, because I imagine privacy is hard when the whole world knows your name. But for now, let's talk about your latest projects. There's a documentary coming out soon, isn't there?" Harry smiled slightly and nodded, explaining the importance of storytelling and giving veterans and underrepresented communities a voice. He spoke eloquently, passionately, and the audience nodded approvingly. For the first 5 minutes, everything was smooth. Graham threw in a few light-hearted jokes. Harry played along. Laughter bounced around the studio. The other guests chimed in, adding their own anecdotes. It was the kind of warm, entertaining segment that made the Graham Norton show a beloved institution. But then, Graham's questions started to lean sharper. Almost imperceptibly at first. A slight shift in tone. A different kind of curiosity. So, Graham began, his smile still friendly, but his tone just a little more pointed. "You and Meghan stepping back from the royal family. Or is it stepping away? Or stepping out? I lose track. What exactly would you call it?" Harry's jaw stiffened slightly, though his smile remained. "We just wanted to focus on our family and our own work. That's all. No big mystery." "Of course," Graham said lightly. "But you do realize it looks to everyone else like you ran away. One day a prince, the next, well, a Californian with a Netflix deal. Was that always the plan?" The audience chuckled, unsure if they were supposed to. A few nervous glances were exchanged. Harry's expression tightened. "It's not running away if you're leaving something toxic behind," he shot back quickly. Graham raised his eyebrows, but maintained his composure. "Ah, toxic," he echoed, tapping his cards. "That word comes up a lot when people talk about you and Meghan. Toxic press. Toxic palace. Toxic traditions. Is there anything about royal life you did like?" Harry leaned back and crossed his arms, his tone noticeably colder now. "That's not a fair question. I served my family and my country for years. But when it started hurting the people I love, it was time to go." "Hurting?" Graham pressed, still smiling, but with a glint in his eye. "Because of the press? Or because of the family itself?" Harry's voice dropped half an octave. Both. The temperature in the room shifted. The audience sensed something building, a tension that crackled in the air like static electricity. Graham, unfazed, flipped to his next card. Well, on that note, let's talk about Meghan. Many people felt she never quite fit in with the royal family. Some even say she knew she wouldn't and went in with an agenda. How do you respond to that? Harry's smile was gone now. He stared straight at Graham and said very flatly, "That's nonsense. And frankly, a ridiculous question." Graham gave a little laugh and held up his hands. "No offense intended. I'm just asking what's already out there. These are the things people say." Harry leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. Maybe people shouldn't say things they know nothing about. A ripple of unease moved through the audience. Graham sensed it too, but he wasn't backing down. Of course, he replied smoothly. But let's be honest, you moved halfway across the world, cut ties with your family, and yet you still keep popping up on magazine covers and TV screens. If you wanted privacy so badly, why not just fade quietly into the background? That was the moment Harry's calm veneer began to crack. He let out a short laugh, but it wasn't warm. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice laced with irritation. Graham tilted his head slightly. "Oh, I think I get it. But I'm curious to hear you explain it." Harry's eyes flashed. "It's not about disappearing. It's about controlling the narrative. Telling our story before people like you twist it into something ugly." Graham sat back, fingers steepled. So we're the problem." Harry didn't answer. The tension was palpable now. The audience still. The cameras rolling. Every pair of eyes locked on the two men as the temperature in the studio seemed to rise degree by degree. And this was only the beginning. The audience didn't dare breathe. Even the studio lights seemed hotter now. Harry sat rigid on the famous red sofa, his jaw tense, his knuckles white on the armrest. Graham, by contrast, sat with the relaxed elegance of a man who'd seen 1,000 tense interviews before. But he could sense the powder keg he was sitting next to. And he was striking matches anyway. "Well," Graham said after a beat, his smile almost apologetic, but his eyes glinting with challenge. "You've made it very clear you wanted to control your own story, Harry. But surely you can see how it looks a little contradictory. You asked for privacy, and yet here you are on my show in front of millions of people promoting your book, your documentary, your podcasts. It's all rather public, isn't it?" Harry's lip curled ever so slightly. "There's a big difference between telling your own story and letting tabloids lie about it." Graham mused, leaning forward slightly. "But doesn't telling your story invite scrutiny? The more you reveal, the more people will analyze. You can't really expect the world to simply accept your version without question, can you?" Harry's eyes narrowed. "You mean your version?" Graham chuckled softly. "I don't have a version, Your Highness. I just have questions." There it was. A flash of red in Harry's cheeks. "And those questions are the same ones people like you have been asking for years. You don't care about answers. You just want a headline." The audience murmured. Graham smiled tightly, steepling his fingers. "All right, then," he said. "Let me try something different. You've said publicly that you felt unsupported by the royal family during Meghan's time in the UK. Can you tell us specifically what support you expected? What help you asked for that was denied?" Harry exhaled sharply through his nose. "I expected them to protect her the way they protected others. To treat her like family. And they didn't." "They didn't," Harry snapped. "Next question." Graham raised an eyebrow, but continued, flipping to the next card. "Very well. You've also said that racism played a large role in your decision to leave the UK. But many in the public feel that criticism of Meghan was more about her behavior than her background. Do you think you're being entirely fair when you paint it all with the brush of racism?" Harry's head jerked back as though he'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice icy. "It's just a question," Graham said, his tone even. "Some feel you've used accusations of racism to silence legitimate criticism. Do you see how that might come across?" Harry leaned forward now, his voice rising. "No, Graham. What I see is someone trying to justify bigotry because it's dressed up as opinion." The audience gasped at the sharpness of his tone. Graham didn't flinch. "Of course," he said calmly. "But isn't it also dangerous to assume that every negative comment is rooted in racism? Sometimes people simply don't like you or your choices. That's not necessarily prejudice, is it?" Harry was glaring now. "You're walking a fine line, Graham. A very fine line." Graham's smile tightened into something colder. "I'm walking the same line I walk with every guest, Harry. I ask questions the public wants answered. If those questions upset you, perhaps that says more about the answers than about me." The air between them was electric now. The other guests on the sofa had shrunk into the shadows, visibly uncomfortable. Even the audience, so loud and lively at the beginning, was hushed now, hanging on every syllable. "All right," Graham continued after a long pause. "Let's move on. You've described the royal family as an institution. Some would say that sounds rather impersonal for your own flesh and blood. Do you feel there's still love there, or is it just duty and obligation at this point?" Harry's nostrils flared. His fingers dug into the sofa cushion. "I love my family," he said slowly, his voice low and tense. "But love isn't enough when loyalty only goes one way." "Interesting," Graham murmured. "Do you think they feel the same about you? That you've been disloyal to them?" Harry turned sharply toward him. "You don't know them. You don't know me. So don't pretend you understand." Graham's tone stayed smooth as silk. "I'm only asking what millions of viewers are already thinking." Harry shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "You're not asking. You're accusing. That's what you do, isn't it? Dress up mockery and judgment as entertainment." Graham's smile flickered. "Entertainment and journalism aren't mutually exclusive," he replied softly. Harry's voice rose a notch, his composure beginning to crack. "You think this is journalism? You think dragging people onto your sofa and picking them apart like they're animals in a zoo is journalism?" "Harry," Graham began, but Harry cut him off, his voice sharp now, slicing through the studio silence. "No, don't harry me. You sit there with your cards and your smirk, and you think you can just toy with people. You think because you make people laugh, you're not hurting anyone. But you are. You're just too smug to see it." The words hung in the air. The silence was deafening. For the first time all night, Graham's expression hardened. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Harry's. "And you," he said evenly, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "Think because you've suffered, you're beyond reproach. But you're not. You came here knowing the questions that would come. And now you're proving exactly why people think you can't handle them." Harry froze. His eyes blazed. His breath came faster. The audience sat in stunned silence, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Harry's hands trembled slightly in his lap. For a brief moment, it looked like he might walk off right then. But instead, he stayed. For a few seconds, the entire studio was frozen. The audience sat wide-eyed and silent, the air thick with unease. The cameras kept rolling, capturing everything. The tightness in Harry's jaw. The faint glimmer of challenge in Graham's eyes. The awkward, almost frightened expressions of the other guests on the sofa, who looked like they wanted to melt into the cushions. Harry's breathing was audible now. Shallow. Quick. His posture was rigid, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Graham, in stark contrast, leaned back in his chair with calm precision, his fingers steepled in front of him. The silence was broken when Graham gently said, "You seem upset." The words were soft, but sharp. Like a surgeon's scalpel. Harry's head snapped toward him, his eyes blazing. Upset? You think this is upset? You sit here, Graham, making veiled jabs at me, at my wife, at my family, and you think I don't notice? You think I don't know exactly what you're doing? Graham's expression didn't change. And what exactly am I doing? You're turning me into a spectacle, Harry hissed. That's what you do. That's what this show does. You bring people here, make them feel welcome, then cut them down for sport. All while pretending it's just a bit of harmless fun. Graham tilted his head slightly, his voice still measured. And you came anyway, knowing all that. Why? The question seemed to strike Harry like a physical blow. He blinked hard, as though trying to compose himself. But the anger didn't fade. I came because I thought maybe you'd be different, he spat. Maybe you'd treat me like a human being, not just another headline. Graham's smile hardened, though it never reached his eyes. I've treated you exactly like every other guest who's sat here. Nothing more, nothing less. You're the one who seems to think the rules shouldn't apply to you. Harry's fist clenched on his knees. Oh, don't give me that sanctimonious nonsense, he snapped. You think you're better than the tabloids just because you say it with a laugh, but you're not. You're worse. At least they're honest about what they are. The audience let out a collective murmur at that, some gasping softly. Graham's brow furrowed, his tone sharpening ever so slightly. Worse? You're accusing me of being worse than the papers that hounded your mother to her death? Is that what you're saying? Harry shot to his feet, his face flushed with rage. Don't you dare bring my mother into this, he shouted, his voice echoing across the studio. Don't you dare. Even Graham leaned back slightly at the sudden eruption. The other guests froze, their eyes darting between the two men. Harry, Graham said after a moment, his voice even but with an unmistakable edge. You've spent years invoking her name when it suits your narrative. But when someone else does it, suddenly it's off limits. That's a double standard, isn't it? Harry's chest heaved as he glared down at Graham. You don't know what you're talking about, he said through gritted teeth. Then explain it to me, Graham pressed, still seated, still calm. Help me understand. Help the audience understand. You keep saying you want your truth to be heard, so tell it. But don't stand there and accuse everyone of bad faith just because the questions are hard. Harry laughed bitterly, shaking his head. You think this is about hard questions? You think this is journalism? This is just another circus. You don't care about answers. You don't care about truth. You just care about how many people tune in to watch me squirm. Graham's lips pressed into a thin line, but he didn't look away. That's an interesting theory, he said quietly. But the only one making you squirm is you. That was it. Harry's composure finally broke. His voice rose to a near shout, his accent sharper than ever. You think this is a show, don't you? You think this is all just good fun? You think people's lives, my life, is just entertainment for you to poke at and laugh about? Well, congratulations, Graham. You've gotten what you wanted. He took a step closer to the host desk, his face twisted with fury. But let me tell you something. This isn't just some joke. This isn't some game. You're playing with people's lives, and you don't even care. You call yourself a host, a journalist, whatever. But you're just another bully with a microphone and an audience. The audience was dead silent now. Not even a cough. Not even a whisper. Just the faint hum of the studio lights and the sound of Harry's ragged breathing. Graham's eyes narrowed, and for the first time all night, his voice carried a chill that cut through the air. If that's how you feel, Harry, then perhaps you shouldn't have come. Because nobody forced you into that chair. You chose to sit there. You chose to speak. And now that the questions don't suit you, you're calling me a bully. Harry leaned across the desk, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper, though the microphone still picked it up clearly. You don't deserve to sit there. You don't deserve to talk about people like me. You're a parasite. You invite people here just to humiliate them, to make them look small so you can feel big." The words hung in the air, heavy and bitter. Graham didn't flinch, though his jaw tightened. He stood slowly, matching Harry's height, and the two of them locked eyes, neither willing to break. "Maybe," Graham said finally, his voice low but firm. "You should ask yourself why you feel so small in the first place." That was the final spark. Harry slammed his microphone down onto the desk so hard the audience jumped. His voice boomed, raw and full of fury. "That's it. I'm done. You think you can drag me and my family through the mud and call it entertainment? You think you're clever? You think you're better than everyone you humiliate up here? Well, you're not. You're pathetic. This whole show is pathetic." He turned to the audience now, gesturing broadly with one arm. "And you lot. You sit here laughing along while he tears people to shreds. Do you feel good about yourselves? Do you?" Nobody answered. The audience was frozen, their faces a mixture of shock and discomfort. Harry turned back to Graham, his voice shaking with rage, but loud enough to fill the room. "You are everything that's wrong with this country, with this world. You dress up cruelty as wit and call it a job. Well, you can keep it, Graham. Because I won't play your game." And with that, he turned sharply and stormed toward the exit. The cameras followed him as his footsteps echoed against the studio floor, his back straight, his fists still clenched. Graham remained standing behind his desk, his expression unreadable, his hands resting lightly on the edge of the table. The door closed behind Harry with a deafening thud. The audience sat frozen. And Graham, after a long, heavy pause, finally exhaled and said softly, almost to himself, "Well, that escalated quickly." The camera zoomed in on his face as he straightened his jacket, his eyes still fixed on the door where Harry had disappeared. The other guests on the sofa exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure whether they should stay put or quietly slip away. Finally, Graham turned back to face the audience, his signature wry smile returning, though this time edged with steel. "Well," he said dryly. "That was festive." A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the audience, breaking the spell. Some clapped politely. Graham held up a hand to quiet them, his tone suddenly serious. "Look," he began. "I want to say something here. Because clearly tonight went in a direction none of us expected. Least of all me. But here's the thing." He paused, scanning the audience and then glancing straight into the camera. "I've been doing this job a very long time. And in that time I've had everyone on this sofa. Rock stars, presidents, prime ministers, actors, authors, saints, and sinners. Some of them charming, some of them difficult. All of them human." He tapped the desk lightly. "And what we do here on this stage is ask questions. Sometimes they're easy questions. Sometimes they're hard. But they're questions people deserve to hear answered. That's not bullying. That's not cruelty. That's conversation. And if a guest can't handle that, perhaps they shouldn't agree to sit in this chair." The audience broke into scattered applause, though Graham waved it down with a faint smile. "I have nothing but sympathy for Harry's struggles," he continued, his voice softening just slightly. "For what he went through as a boy and what he continues to endure. But sympathy," he added, his tone sharpening again, "doesn't exempt anyone from scrutiny. Especially when they voluntarily put themselves in the spotlight." He leaned forward now, his eyes glittering. "Because make no mistake," he said. "That wasn't me attacking him. That was him attacking himself. What you just saw wasn't cruelty from me. It was a man so determined to control the narrative that he couldn't stand being asked the simplest questions about it. And that says more about him than it does about me." The audience murmured in agreement, some even clapping again, louder this time. Graham's gaze drifted to the floor for a moment, then back to the camera. "And to Harry, if you're watching this later, I wish you and your family nothing but peace. But if you come here to tell your story, don't expect me or anyone else to just nod along and smile. Because that's not honesty. That's theater. And this show is not theater. This is a conversation. He gave a faint shrug, then sat back down in his chair, picking up a cue card. Well, he said, his signature wit re-emerging to lighten the mood. That was Prince Harry, everyone. For about 15 minutes, anyway. The audience laughed, this time more freely, the tension finally breaking. Coming up next, Graham said, glancing at the other guests still seated on the sofa, who were now visibly relieved. We'll be joined by someone who doesn't mind answering questions. Or at least hasn't stormed off yet. The camera pulled back slightly as Graham chuckled softly to himself, shuffling his cards as if nothing had happened, though the slight smirk on his face said otherwise. But then he looked straight into the lens one last time, his eyes narrowing playfully. And for anyone at home who's upset by what you've just seen, don't be. Because the truth has a way of coming out, whether you like it or not. And tonight, you all saw it for yourselves. He leaned back, spread his arms casually, and let the studio lights shine down on him as the applause swelled around him once more. In the weeks that followed, the footage spread like wildfire. Clips were shared millions of times. Headlines screamed from every outlet. Social media exploded with reactions, both supportive and critical. Some said Graham had been too harsh, that he'd gone too far. Some said Harry had been unfairly targeted, that he deserved more compassion given his history and trauma. But most people saw the truth. They saw a man who had been given every advantage in life, who had walked away from privilege only to discover that the world didn't owe him anything. They saw a man who had profited from his family's pain while claiming to want privacy. They saw a man who demanded respect while offering none. They saw exactly what Graham had shown them. And they couldn't look away. The moment Harry slammed his microphone down and stormed off became iconic. It was replayed, analyzed, dissected. Body language experts weighed in. Psychologists offered opinions. Commentators debated who was right and who was wrong. But for most people who watched it, the answer was obvious. Graham had been doing his job. Harry had been unable to handle the questions. And the cameras had captured it all. In the end, the story was not about Prince Harry's anger or Graham Norton's calm. It was about something deeper. Something more universal. It was about the simple truth that no one is above basic accountability. No one is too important to face questions. No one is so special that they get to control every narrative. Harry walked into that studio believing he could control the conversation. He walked out learning that he could not. And Graham sat there, steady and composed, having proven that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to be intimidated by someone who thinks they're above the rules. The red sofa would host many more guests. The show would continue for many more seasons. But that night would be remembered as one of the most explosive moments in British television history. A prince who couldn't handle the heat had finally met his match. And the world had watched it all unfold. The truth may be uncomfortable. But it's always worth hearing. The studio lights dimmed. The audience filed out, still buzzing with what they'd witnessed. The crew began breaking down the set, preparing for tomorrow's show, for tomorrow's guests, for tomorrow's conversations. But the memory of that night lingered. A reminder that fame and title and privilege mean nothing when you're sitting across from someone who refuses to be intimidated. A reminder that respect, real respect, cannot be demanded. It must be earned. And a reminder that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up, look someone in the eye, and ask the questions that need to be asked. Because sometimes, that's the only way to make someone understand. Sometimes, that's the only way to make someone listen. Sometimes, that's the only way to teach a lesson that should have been learned long ago.